Talking Back, Thinking Feminist, Thinking Black. And I remember reading that text and saying, oh my gosh, I can actually think with this theory. So that was I wasn't an undergraduate, I was a doctoral student. And I began to understand that I could think with Black feminist theory. So I didn't have to decide whether being a woman was more important or being Black was more important. I could be them simultaneously.
Yeah.
And that's what Bell Hooks gave me. So it gave me a way to think about myself in the work, but it also gave me a way to think about those that at that time I was studying. So as a first year, second year doctoral student, I was really interested in the high school principalship. I wanted to be a principal. I studied principals, and the principals I studied were Black women. So to have a set of theories and not so much practices of research, but to have a set of theories that spoke to this integrated me and this integrated subject that I was studying was like mind-boggling. It was breathtaking in so many ways. But I also then began to think, if I can think with this theory, I can also work with this theory. But what seemed to be missing from that body of theory, again, as I look back over the early first wave feminists, and I look to the time in the 1990s when I was coming into my own as a qualitative researcher, what was missing was this idea of, some might call it the ethos of Black womanhood. I thought about it as the spirit of Black womanhood. So I knew Black women, and I knew Black women who were engaged in all kinds of spiritual practice. And I don't mean hoodoo or voodoo or black magic or anything like that. I mean rituals that sustained us in this work. And I thought, I want to think about that. I want to think about it in a very explicit way. I want to name Black feminist spirituality, and I want to think about it in the context of research. So that's sort of how in darkened feminist epistemology came around for me. I wanted to think about Black feminism, a la Bell Hooks and Barbara Smith and Patricia Hill Collins, but I wanted to explicitly name spirit. And I wanted to explicitly think about myself in relationship to other Black feminists or womanists in other parts of the world. And neither of those two things, the global part of it nor the spiritual part of it, were a part of the Black feminism that I came up in. And so in thinking my way, again, with theory and into theory, that's when I realized that what I wanted was a body of work that helped me place my understandings of who I am as a Black woman and other people's understandings against a Black backdrop.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just we're creating Black feminism because white feminists won't allow us to be a part of the group. This was about we're creating Black feminism because Blackness in and of itself is an important space out of which to think. And so that's part of how in darkened feminism came to be for me. If we put our understandings as African Americans, as Black women in the diaspora, against a Black backdrop, African women, Caribbean women, Latin American women who are Black, what do we see? How do we see it differently? And that's when you began to see those things like spirituality and the global recognition of Black women, one to the other, come into a kind of clarity for me. So that was how it got started.
So it's a real departure from that notion of the subaltern or anything like that. It's really,
it isn't
like
that at all.
Yeah.
It isn't that at all. In fact, the subaltern, that conversation wasn't even happening at the time when I was thinking about in darkened feminism. It was really this idea of what happens when we put things against a Black backdrop.
Yeah.
And so we know what happens in the Enlightenment. We know what happens when we think about the Enlightenment. But what happens when Black women think about what it means to incorporate Blackness into what we do? To think ourselves Black. There's something about the spiritual. It's, my heart talking to yours. And your heart always hears that. So the ruffling of feathers was not within the context of Black womanhood. I was really clear about about black feminism and honoring black feminism and not seeing this as a total departure from black feminism, but an enlarging of the circle, to acknowledge and name something that was already there. So when I look at, if you look at probably the black feminist work that we most know together is probably the work of Bell Hooks. Yeah. When Bell Hooks started writing, this work was deeply sacred, deeply spiritual, but spirit was not a word that was at all in those early texts. Mm-hmm. It wasn't. It couldn't be heard. It couldn't be heard. Yeah. I think in many ways it was a taken for granted. Mm. You know, African people by nature are incredibly spiritual people. Mm. It's the reason why people can continue to walk around and be okay, because honestly, given the kind of oppressions and seizures that black bodies have been under for decades, eons, black people should be a little more upset than we really are. Mm. It was important to say out loud that we walk in a way that attempts to, and we think in a way that attempts to lift up everybody, that it attempts to lift up the goodness within people, specifically ourselves, but in others as well. Mm. That we don't exist as individuals, we as black women. We don't have that luxury. We exist as a body, and I exist because other black women exist, and they are me, and I am them. And that is a very different sort of foundation than starting with, I exist, I'm an individual, I'm rugged, I will lift myself up by my bootstraps, thank you. So that for us that's not even, it's like, I don't even know what to do with that. Right. Yeah. I have a community to which I am beholden. I am responsible to that community. My work must be responsible to that community. And I am responsible for lifting that community by virtue of the actions that I take. Mm-hmm. That's a very different stance on research than other stances. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the reason why this idea of black feminism and darkened feminism is so very critical. Mm-hmm. It isn't sort of cute. It is fundamental to the way that we see ourselves here and in other places in the diaspora and on the continent. And it gives us a way to think ourselves together. Yeah, I can understand. And I don't mean that just in terms of identities. I mean that in terms of our very spirits. I mean that in terms of making sense of the disconnection between ourselves and sisters in the diaspora, in sisters in the continent, and in Canada, and wherever else we exist. We exist as a diaspora because we are dismembered. In order to find ourselves again, to make sense of ourselves, to heal, mm-hmm. we have to remember. Mm-hmm. And so part of the work of this research is about remembering. And I can't do that solely with anthropological methods that might have me going and studying or watching or looking or interviewing even. I've got to be with, stand with. And it's not unlike what our Native American scholar friends and our Latin American sisters are saying. It's the same thing. Mm-hmm. Just this idea that I am responsible to the ancestors who chose to live so that I might have the opportunity to do this work, and without whom I could not. So that's my responsibility. Title, The Substance of Things Hoped For, The Evidence of Things Unseen, is really a call for a kind of hope, that there's always this possibility, there exists this possibility that we can somehow, somewhere see each other's humanity. That was also in this idea of In Darkened Feminism. So I've got to be the best me I can be in order for you to see that person. Now, I'm not trying to show you anything that's not real. I'm just trying to be me and to work as me, to not try to be anything other than the best me I can be. And I think that's the desire of most human beings. But I can't do that with language and theories and practices that don't honor who I am. So if I can't do it with the ones that are there, I'll have to make some new ones. And so that was part of the goal. But it was also the hope that in the creation of the new, that I'll continue to call myself, name myself, a feminist. I was one of those who did not move to the notion of womanism. It's not that I have anything against womanism. In fact, most people would say I'm probably more womanist than feminist. But feminism gives me the opportunity to have conversations with women who I want to have conversations with, and men if they so desire. And that's why I kept it in darkened feminism, a kind of feminism that is put against a black backdrop or a dark backdrop that makes sense to those of us who are doing this work. So I'm just saying I kept it because I still think there's a little bit of hope that says there are some people like you sitting behind the camera, or like this person over here, or like this person over here. There's still hope that the kind of conversations, the kind of fierceness that you described is still possible. So I keep it because it gives us some common ground.